Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and begin. Good afternoon. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brethren and sisters can gather together in unity. I'm Reverend Brian Smith, Director of Advancement and Strategic Partnerships at the Chicago Theological Seminary. Our seminary was founded by ministers who wanted to train and equip preachers to resist slavery. In 1855, CTS was an active leader in the abolitionist movement, and they established a culture of cutting edge activism. And this culture has led to many firsts in terms of supporting civil, human, and women's rights, gender and racial equity, interreligious dialogue, field education for clergy, and even, of course, online education, to name a few. So I welcome all of you on behalf of our great seminary, and we're going to pause at this moment to extend blessings upon our gathering, and we'll be led by Reverend Carmen Frederick. And I don't see Imam Tariq Alameen. Hopefully he will enter soon, but we'll go ahead and begin with our blessings by Reverend Dr. Frederick.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are each well. Today I offer a blessing and a prayer from the Common Book of Prayer, and it is a Native American traditional prayer. Let us bow. O Great Spirit, whose breath gives life to the world, and whose voice is heard in the soft breeze, we need your strength and wisdom. Cause us to walk in beauty. Give us eyes ever to behold the red and purple sunset. Make us wise so that we may understand what you have taught us. Help us learn the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. Make us always ready to come to you with clean hands and steady eyes. So when life fades like the fading sunset, our spirits may come to you without shame. Amen.
Amen. I believe Imam El Amin is entering. Have you logged on yet, sir? Try to maintain our interfaith focus. If not, we will go ahead and we will move forward with our program. I recognize that perhaps I'm preaching to the choir, but we want to make sure that we emphasize a number of things today. Of course, all of you recognize the critical phase of history that we've entered into as a nation. And of course, Chicago Theological Seminary is deeply concerned about the interests and needs of our surrounding communities. So before we begin our session, I want to allow two gentlemen to give us brief remarks with respect to the census and voting. So now I'm going to ask Brother Mitchell to come to us. And let me pause one more time. Brother Imam El Tariq, are you here with us? Okay. We're going to go ahead and we're going to have remarks from Brother Mitchell about the census, and then Brother Garner with respect to a voting initiative that he is leading.
All right, if I can share the screen, I'm gonna bring this up shortly. Well, for some reason I'm having a difficulty sharing this, but let me recite this to our audience. This afternoon's webinar, we will be sharing information relative to a number of points. Some of them are legal points. And we want to inform the audience that this is intended to be information provided to you as attendees, and it's intended for informational purposes only. The content and or the statements shared in this webinar are not to be considered legal advice. It's not to be relied upon solely by you in making any decisions that may impact you or your congregations. The procedures that you should adopt and protocols you should follow for any house of worship should not be implemented without consultation with a licensed attorney or proper legal authority. With that, I want to thank everyone for joining this afternoon. And I want to remind you, I was offered this opportunity to remind each and every one of us that September 30th, which is basically a week and a day away, the official end will come to the counting our decennial census. And this census is critical for our communities, upon which we rely for funding of various capital projects such as roads and bridges, for educational such as Pell Grants and loans, health care in terms of Medicaid, and education, excuse me, and also housing such as Section 8 vouchers and senior citizen housing developments. All of this depends on federal funding. And in order to get our full share of funding, each of us must complete the census to get our numbers up. The website reference is my2020census.gov. It's only about a 5 to 7 minute exercise to supply your name, address, date of birth, your race and ethnicity, and that same information for everyone living into your household. There's no inquiry into your bank account, social security number, or anything like that. And your information is not shared with any government agency aside the Census Bureau. So once again, please go to the website, my2020census.gov. Thank you.
I have a question for Brother Mitchell, if it's okay, Reverend Smith.
Yes, go ahead.
Brother Mitchell, can you tell us when is the deadline to complete all of the census documentation? I've heard various dates, but if you could clarify that for us, I think that'd be very helpful.
September 30th, next Wednesday, is the last day to submit a response to the questionnaire. I can't emphasize it enough how important it is. And I think it's a message that needs to be carried to each of our congregations, because with the pandemic, a lot of money has been expenses of this has been borne by local governments. Here in Chicago, Chicago is looking at a critical shortage. And if we don't at least have federal dollars to support, how are these things going to be, how are the leads going to be made? And in essence, it's going to be marginalized people, many of whom we represent are in our congregations that are going to suffer the most. If anyone is interested, this Sunday, if you care to contact me, I'm working with a state, let's say, census funder. It's called the Illinois Coalition of Immigrant and Refugee Rights. We have some giveaways such as USB cards. We got face masks. Anything that we could do to help promote this and put this last push, because it's not a hard call to complete the questionnaire. It's just we must remind our membership that this is something they need to do.
Thank you. Let's go forward with Mr. Garner, and we're going to hear more from him in the future, but we wanted to make sure you heard about the census because obviously we have an impending deadline.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. My name is Andre Garner, and as Brian mentioned, I am here to talk a little bit about a voter initiative. My day job, as I referenced earlier, is I am the managing partner of a strategic communications consultancy. We call it the Black Ink Group. But I'm also a very proud member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity. I'm a past bossless or president of IOTA chapter here in Chicago. Our chapter just turned 100 years old last year. And it's good to see you, Reverend Ozzie. Congratulations on your recent retirement.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. And I've got a few other friends I know here on the call as well. But just briefly, just to tell you about what we're up to, we've been hearing a lot of concerns around Chicago in particular, in the communities that we serve on the south and west sides. People are really anxious about ensuring that their votes will be counted in the upcoming election. Obviously, with COVID, people are concerned about crowds and waiting periods and the inherent dangers therein when it comes to voting on election day. But there's also some concerns that people have heard lots about through the news media about write-in, or not write-in, but mail-in votes. So in an attempt to address some of those concerns, we've organized an initiative that we're calling Roll to the Polls. And under that particular marketing banner, it's our intention to organize rides to early voting sites. We'll be staging people at a number of churches and nonprofit organizations, primarily on the south and west sides of Chicago, on Saturdays, on the 2 Saturdays and 2 Sundays during the early voting period. And when people request rides, we'll have an online sign up request portal, but we'll also have a phone-in portal for requesting rides as well. We're going to actually have these staging sites where people will gather. And we're working actually with a lot of faith-based organizations and not-for-profits and utilizing their vans and their buses in a coordinated efforts to drive people to early voting sites during the early voting period. That's just it in a nutshell. There'll be more details to come. We've got a number of working committees that are doing everything from making sure that we're compliant with all of the best practices and recommendations when it comes to social distancing, wearing our mask and disinfecting the vans and the buses and the sites where we'll be gathering, to actually making sure that we've got partners that'll provide some things like snacks and refreshments and that sort of thing for those who participate. Again, this will be coming up beginning, I think the 4 dates start with the 24th of October, and our last date will be the 1st of November. And there'll be more to come, and hopefully we'll be able to communicate that through Bryant and the folks here at CST. Thank you for the opportunity.
So we'll be providing ongoing communications, and just bear in mind, if you're a congregation and you have a vehicle, they certainly want to be able to connect with you. And we'll be doing more outreach, and we'll be working with the Pan-Hellenic Council. Is that right? I'll be doing some work with them as well, because there are initiatives that are being presented by other sororities and fraternities. So we want to make sure that we get the collective information and present that to you as well.
Absolutely.
Let's move forward with an overview of the workshop. Just want to share some background information. Earlier this year, we received a grant from the Henry Luce Foundation to support Southside faith leaders in their response to COVID-19 and the community unrest. And we've provided technology grants to congregations, as well as training to equip congregations for virtual worship. We're providing therapy and counseling services to faith leaders right now as we speak. And we have a dedicated cohort of Muslim, Jewish, and Christian leaders from multiple denominations. And we're here to serve you today. Today, we're going to talk about safety and liability issues in the age of COVID-19. We recognize that faith leaders are challenged with both serving their congregations' spiritual needs, but also protecting their physical health. So we want to offer you some perspectives from professionals who have actually focused on these issues. So we have a team of dynamic professionals. And our distinguished panel includes Reverend Dr. James Foster, pastor, theologian, and security director for both Lutheran and McCormick Theological Seminaries. Dr. Belinda Jervis, an international healthcare compliance consultant and trustee for the North Shore Faith Community Church that I pastor. Somebody say amen.
Amen.
We also have Dr. Wilnice Jasmine, who is the medical director of behavioral health at the Chicago Department of Public Health. Brother Abdullah Gregory Mitchell, who you heard from, Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, and Brother Rodney Howard, all attorneys, all licensed attorneys in the state of Illinois. So in light of the fact that today we have surpassed 200,000 deaths as a result of COVID-19, yet we are still receiving conflicting information from the federal government on the likely dangers of coronavirus, as well as some religious leaders and political leaders who have politicized and de-emphasized the danger of the virus. We're asking our panelists to offer their unique perspectives in terms of their specific roles and their experiences serving the constituents that are under their care. Our workshop is going to begin with brief commentaries from 3 of our panelists concerning both safety and health-related issues. And then we'll hear from the 3 remaining legal experts, concluding with a 30-minute presentation on liability considerations. Then we will have 45 minutes to dialogue with all of the panelists. So during that portion of our program, we ask you to list your questions in the chat room feature, and I will facilitate and convey your questions to the panelists. I want to take this time to thank the members of my team, Marie Whitney and Roxy Kui. I think Shauna Warren is also present. I just want to celebrate them and thank them right now for making this possible. So let's begin, Dr. Foster, with you. Could you please begin our conversation with your experience as both a pastor and director for the COVID-19 response team for 2 seminaries?
Yeah, okay. Reverend Smith, be my timekeeper here. The thing that I think I would want people to know starting out, just from our experience here, and again, I am a pastor that has a congregation who's decided to not gather in our community space. Over the last 7 years, we worship in a local community center, which we really valued and love, but we made the decision of going 100% online. But at the same time, I'm responsible as part of our viral outbreak response team here at the seminaries for setting the protocols, procedures, and policies to operate. And we at the Lutheran School of Theology here in Chicago, we have limited our capacity and our occupancy. The classes have been are 100% online available, but students are able to attend a classroom if they so desire. So just want to give you a little balance to kind of the perspective. Here's what I think has been really invaluable with our experience of kind of dealing with these surprises that I would want to inform all of you, and that is to clearly state and clearly understand and state, and in some cases remember and restate what your guiding principles are, so that as you go forward with trying to reimagine a future, reimagine a new future, that's sort of your the prophetic word, the thing that God has said, the thing that has commonly driven everyone to a certain point, doesn't get lost in this, because it, yes, surprised some professionals, might have surprised the pastor, might have surprised the medical community, but it did not surprise God. So one of the things that I would say is to make sure that you have those guiding principles for your organization, your church, your not-for-profit. And that way you can understand prophetically going forward, trying to see around the corner and understand what's going on. You can do that in the context of your big why. And if your why is big enough, it's my opinion that you'll discover the how. So the guiding principles are important. And because I'm also an operations person, I think that if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. So I would say make sure we get those things down, and then to clearly frame your perspective as the organization, as the leader of the organization. Clearly frame it. What are the things, what are the categories and the framings that are necessary to get people to hear and see clearly what it is you're doing, what your perspective is? For us, it is faith plus facts minus fear, right? So we appeal to our faith. We look at the facts. We don't lose sight of them. We don't romanticize. You know, we try to actually study the concept and not the idea of the concept, right? So faith plus facts minus fear is how we're framing how we go forward in the things that we do, because people are gonna have questions from all over your congregation throughout your leadership, and if you're working for a larger institution like I do, throughout the institution. So framing, I think, is very important. And then I know I don't have a whole lot of time. Whenever you're trying to do something new and creating leadership and giving guiding principles, it's also important to realize that these are human beings, that habits and patterns create its own gravity. So you're going to deal with pattern interruption and habit gravity. And that is, you'll begin to learn that we need to be patient and we have to look at the human being, because willingness and good intention is great, but it is not enough, right? We have to practice to a certain point, because it's not going to suddenly dry up and go away. This did not leave in April. We are learning to live with things like we have with so many other things. And so dealing with the thing that drives people are not the good ideas. They're the tapes that play behind their eyes, what habitually they're used to doing. They have spent more time doing what they used to do than what it is you're trying to get them to do new. And so an appeal to the social sciences, dealing with people's behavioral health is super, super important in this endeavor, and people need ministry. All right, I'm pretty sure I'm out of time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Dr. Jervis, you've traveled the world observing compliance standards and working with the various healthcare institutions. What's your global perspective on how we are handling the virus and how we should start thinking about resuming face-to-face contact if and even when it might even be feasible?
Thank you, Pastor. And certainly, again, I just want to say I'm grateful and honored to be able to have the invitation and to certainly sit with this distinguished panel. And as you said, and as everyone has alluded to, these are some unprecedented times that we're experiencing. And since the onset of the coronavirus, we've endured some record-breaking illnesses, the loss of life, unemployment, some economical hardships, homelessness, and the list goes on. And so we know that the coronavirus, and specifically COVID-19 strain, it does not discriminate. It doesn't care about the person's age, gender, your religious affiliation, your financial status, nor your geographical location. And so in other words, your pedigree or your educational degrees don't give you a pass or an exemption. And despite the fake news that's often shared by a particular individual who currently resides at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, I want to take a few minutes to showcase some of the facts and published figures that have been released. And we think back into December. The coronavirus was limited at that time that we were hearing about in China. But what we know, as a state to you that you indicated, Reverend Smith, more than 31 million cases of the coronavirus have been reported. 21 million of those cases are reports of people that have recovered. But when we talk about the recovery rate, they don't talk about the sequelae or the residual issues that those patients might be facing and enduring. But there's been nearly 1 million deaths, and this is simply what's been reported. Keep in mind, we don't have statistics that are reliable from China, nothing from North Korea, doesn't mean that they don't exist. So from a global perspective, over 188 countries have been impacted. And sad to say, our nation leads that pack. That's not an honor that an industrialized nation like the US, one of the most powerful, should be in those statistics. We're the first nation, the first top 10 includes India, Brazil, Russia, Peru, Colombia, Mexico, Spain, South Africa, and Argentina. But we're way ahead of the pack, unfortunately. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how we can reduce those numbers. But we want to shift the gears right now for a moment and just talk about some of the cases that have surfaced. I'm going to use some case studies. The first is a report that was generated, and it was because of information that was collected by faith leaders throughout the US, talking about COVID-19. And those leaders have reported anywhere from 25 to 35% of their members have contracted the virus. And this is from leaders who initially attempted to resume face-to-face contact and gatherings in their organizations. And one case in point specifically was reported in Washington State. They have a choir of 121 members that decided to go ahead and proceed despite the restrictions and the recommendations not to do so. They held a choir rehearsal for 2.5 hours. People were reportedly social distancing. They weren't hugging like they customarily do. They weren't shaking hands, but they were singing. And as you know, this is an airborne illness. And so trying to project their voices, they were also projecting more droplets and aerosols into the air. 2 weeks later, 45 of those 121 members tested positive for COVID. A number of them that were not tested were still exhibiting symptoms. 3 were hospitalized and two deaths occurred. That doesn't account for how many additional people that they were able to infect. And I want to talk a little bit about a second case that's a little bit more personal. And it's amidst the initial reservations of a colleague of mine who I've known for more than 30 years. She consented to attend her son's wedding a few weeks ago. The bride insisted on proceeding with the nuptials and the planned ceremony. So they had 49 people in attendance for this outside ceremony. They were all wearing masks at the time, besides the bride and groom, and had an inside reception. At that time, since that time, 38 attendees have tested positive. 17 of those people are hospitalized. This is now deemed a cluster, and now they're doing contact tracing because those individuals have in turn infected more than 72 people to this point. And so they're being followed by the CDC and the Department of Health. And we talk a little bit about what we're seeing globally. I can tell you from the pharmaceutical industry and the biotech companies and a lot of the health industries, they're not going back into face-to-face scenarios. They're talking about not even contemplating this until sometime after the first quarter of 2021. And one of the things I also wanted to mention was, you keep hearing a lot of the buzz about there's a vaccine that's on the horizon. Don't be fooled by that, because we don't have proven evidence, and maybe Dr. Jasmine might talk a little bit about that. But we have to be so careful with the information that we have. And I love the fact of Dr. Foster, Reverend Foster, talking about our faith and our facts. And so we have to be cognizant of that and not be fooled, because this virus is alive and well, despite what we're hearing differently.
Thank you, Dr. Jervis. And now we'll pivot over to Dr. Jasmine. You're a medical doctor and medical leader in Chicago, a major city. And so you're dealing with a broad array of individuals. And I'd like to ask you, what are the needs that you have identified from a public health perspective? You can go ahead and share with us.
Yeah, so good afternoon, and thank you, Pastor, for inviting me to be part of this workshop for considerations for faith leaders that they should be taking as they think about reopening. For me, I specialize in both family medicine and preventive medicine, and my day job entails providing medical guidance as part of the leadership team tasked with leading the citywide mental health initiatives, violence prevention initiatives, and substance use and recovery initiatives for the Department of Health. When I wear my COVID hat, one of my responsibilities has been working with the isolation housing efforts. And I also have worked with the Religious Leaders Task Force that provided invaluable input when the city was first facing reopening. COVID-19 has interrupted our everyday course of life and has changed how we even celebrate life's milestones. For example, like Dr. Jervis gave, weddings, they've had to be canceled, postponed, or even minimized from what was originally planned. And so religious services, they went fully virtually, but now we're thinking about how to minimize risk as more and more congregations are considering reopening for in-person services. And these kinds of gatherings, they're important not only for our spirituality, but they help us cope with life stresses and help us maintain connections with others by fostering this sense of shared experience. So even our rituals associated with grieving our lost ones have been impacted by COVID-19. So now there are limitations to the number of people who could attend the funeral, leaving many to come up with new forms of saying our last goodbyes. This is particularly distressing given the sheer number of people who have died and who had previously been healthy. And in Chicago, we know that the Black and Latinx individuals living within our city, we're shouldering a disproportional burden of the health outcomes from COVID-19. So now the loss of loved ones and friends, it's sudden without any warning, and especially from the vantage point from the loved ones left to grieve. And religion, it can be one important source of helping individuals cope with grief. And I thank you for the part you are all playing in this COVID response. The health department is also providing additional supports for the impacts on mental health. And even at the onset of the COVID response earlier this year, the Department of Public Health recognized the need to simultaneously address the mental health implications of this pandemic experience. And so we viewed meeting this increased demand for support in coping with grief, anxiety, depression, and loneliness as a necessity. And we provide options to suit the needs of our residents here in Chicago. Some of these options include, I'll post a link to them in the chat. There's a Windy City Wellness site. It offers mindful meditation tools that can be used to improve how we cope with the mental health implications from our pandemic experience. There are tools on the site available for adults and children. We also run 5 mental health clinics run through the Department of Public Health. And I can also provide the contact information so anyone living in Chicago can receive clinical guided care, regardless of their ability to pay. And also for those who are joining from outside of Chicago, there are national hotlines, such as the one available through the National Alliance for Mental Illness. I'll put that phone number as well. And it's also important to mention that September is National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. We're sharing that message that suicide is preventable and then help is within reach. And you can also call a suicide prevention line if you know someone who needs help. I'll also provide that information. And in general, some of the main public health highlights that I can share with you is for you to influence individual behaviors within your larger gatherings, and to have people take ownership in implementing to the best of their ability infection control measures. So some of these measures include 1, being informed and prepared. So you can visit our website, chicago.gov/coronavirus, and you can learn about the general information regarding coronavirus. There's a plethora of resources available on that website, including if you're having trouble accessing food, or if you know of anyone having trouble accessing food, if you need social supports. The reopening guidelines are also there. If you need tests to be tested, the testing sites are also listed on that website. And the health department run testing sites are free of charge. Another thing to consider, we all know, maintain social physical distancing of a minimum of 6 feet. Wash your hands frequently, and when soap and water is not available, use hand sanitizer. Want you to avoid touching your eyes, your nose, and your mouth because that's how the virus is introduced to the body. If you're not feeling well, we ask that you stay home when you're sick. For frequently touched surfaces and objects, we ask that you clean it throughout the day. And not to forget, your cell phone is also included in that. Wear facial coverings when social distancing cannot be maintained. And then also, we are in the middle, or we're at the beginning of flu season, and the flu vaccine is now available. So especially if you have any underlying health conditions, especially if you are over the age of 65, please get the flu vaccine as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Jasmine. After our conversation, I actually got my first flu shot ever yesterday.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you. I'm not one, I don't use any types of drugs regularly, but I went ahead and I did that after our conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're gonna now pivot towards the primary focus of this particular gathering, and that is the liability issues. A prevailing theme emerged as we were conducting listening sessions with our Strengthening Our Leaders program. And the thought was raised that perhaps we don't fully consider, of course, we hear the information about healthcare and how to protect ourselves, but we're not having extensive conversations about the legal issues that are emerging and that will emerge. As you've heard different examples today, eventually people are going to go through the process of contact tracing, and they're going to be able to assign a certain value with respect to how they got the virus. And at some point, people are going to point out that it's happening in spaces where people aren't practicing proper social distancing. So I'm going to ask Brother Abdullah Mitchell to kind of talk about the conversations we were having, particularly about who you would most likely be sued by and some of the implications when it comes to liability with respect to COVID-19. You're muted, sir.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me and offering this opportunity to share. Let me begin as suggested by Reverend Brian Smith. Who is the target? Well, the target is, the potential target is each of you and your congregations. And that's not to be unduly negative, but the reality of it is, if someone is afflicted and suffering the severe consequences of a COVID-19 infection, they're likely not to have the ability, even the financial ability to address, and they're going to be looking for redress. And they're going to search it, particularly because they're not going to make ultimate decisions. They're going to follow the advice of counsel. And counsel will look at all viable defendants in advocating on behalf of their client. All right. And there is no waiver for religious institutions. There's many cases where places of worship are sued. So I'm going to make a couple of points that I want you to think about as Dr. Wilson and Attorney Howard make their presentation, the slide presentation, to help focus you as you listen to what they have to say. And the first point I want to make is what is a baseline of behavior that you need, or conduct or protocol procedures that you need to identify to guide you in making that decision to whether to open, and if you do make the decision to open, how that's going to manifest itself. Well, in terms of a standard, it's kind of like, what do we look to guide us? Here, the first I would say, suggested baseline for all of us will be your local and state public health departments. We just heard from Dr. Jasmine, and she rattled off a litany of things that you should be considered, from washing your hands, social distancing. And those are things that you must take account of, because they're offering these are standards of reasonable behavior for everyone. So you cannot put yourself in a vacuum and ignore that. The other thing that's been shared with you is the guidelines published by the CDC. There's also guidelines in terms of things like, that's also been referenced is from state statutory regulations such as OSHA, federal OSHA, and work environment standards under workman's compensation laws. And then another standard would be the law, what we call, lawyers call the common law. These are just a plethora of decisions that examine behavior, and a decision is made what is reasonable and what is unreasonable. You are going to be obligated to follow what is reasonable. So with that said, even in terms of this notion of what is reasonable, is going to be informed by what a lot of other people are doing. So if you have a lot of other people that are adhering to these guidelines put out by the Chicago Department of Public Health, the Illinois Department of Public Health, CDC, etc., and you're not, one, aware of them, or you're ignoring them, those will not be excuses. If to the extent that these are fashioned as a new standard of conduct, you're going to be held to that standard of conduct. The next thing, and I want to kind of reiterate a point made by Dr. Foster in his opening remarks. And the point that resonated with me was this concept of communication. It matters not that you have a solid plan if those who will be impacted by it are not aware of it. Whether it's through signs, through whatever media that you use to communicate with your congregation, it is so important that they know what to expect when they come into the house of worship. And even to take it a step further, it's important that you may even conduct a training session, because sometimes it's like you have to tell people 3 to 4 times. Like my wife's a teacher, and everything she tells me is 3 times, and then she sums up, and I finally do get it. So I think that's another point, that training and repetition of the message is so important when you're setting whatever you decide to be your protocols and procedures in reopening your house of worship. The other thing is, well, okay, you have your standards, you have your protocol, you've been telling them and telling them and telling them, but what about that person? I call them either the unruly or the uncooperative parishioner congregant. The person who's been a part of the church for 35, 40 years, they almost feel like they got a ownership in the place. And they said, honey, you ain't keeping me out of the church today. I got to talk with the Lord today. But she comes in sniffling. She looks like she has a fever. She's obviously sick. How do you deal with those situations? That's a situation that you have to address. You can't just turn your head and ignore it. You have a responsibility, because this is a virus, as even once again, focusing on the case studies that Dr. Jervis shared with us earlier. One, look what happened in the choir. Look what happened at that, how it spread. And then letting one person violate your rules, you could endanger your whole congregation. And believe me, people are going to say, well, you should have known better. You were armed. You had this information. Look at your protocols. How did this happen? So it is going to be important that you even start to consider screening people, getting temperature monitors to verify that whether or not they have a fever. If they have obvious signs of sickness, refusing admission. So these are some new duties and new responsibilities. If you're going to assume opening up in a time of a pandemic, points that you need to consider. And the last point that I'll make as you listen to this slide presentation is, if, God forbid, someone becomes infected and you find out, what becomes your responsibility at that particular point? Do you just say, we're going to say a prayer and then leave it at that? Or are you going to take the affirmative steps to say, look, we need to find out everybody who they came in contact with, to share it with them that they are at risk. They may need to be tested. This is another obligation I submit that you're going to have to consider in any time you're talking about reopening. You can't say, oh, it's the responsibility of the Chicago Department of Public Health. They're supposed to be doing contact tracing. They can only trace who they know who's been contacted. You are in the position to know within your congregation who has been infected. And my offer to you is going to have a responsibility, likely to have the responsibility to ferret out those within your congregation, if nothing more, to communicate to the Chicago Department of Public Health, look, we got these 2 people who are infected, so that they can activate their contact tracing program. So with those preliminary remarks, I would ask you to keep them in mind in terms of identifying the baseline, communicating, restricting admissions, and then finally actively doing contact tracing to protect your the members of your congregation. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Mitchell. And as I introduce our primary speakers, I'm going to ask you, Roxy, to go ahead and load the slide presentation. We're blessed to have a dynamic couple. I'm happy to be friends with them. Attorneys Rodney Howard and Dr. Jeanette Wilson. And they work together. They let me know earlier they've been married 39 years. And so we're blessed to have double opportunities to learn. And so we're going to receive them now, and they're going to go through a presentation just giving you some of the specific guidelines that you need to consider if your idea is to try to reopen.
Well, thank you, Reverend Smith, and my husband and I really are excited about the opportunity to share this information. We are partners in the firm Wilson Howard PC. We've been doing church law for more than 25 years. And one of the things that we learned with this COVID is something that I did a doctorate of ministry thesis on. We live in our faith, but we live under the law, which is a statement that Reverend Jackson used to share with me on a regular basis. Because oftentimes faith leaders act as though they don't live under the law. And you've seen recently churches wanting to reopen or faith institutions wanting to reopen in the midst of COVID, saying they had a mandate from God. And the fact of the matter is, our Constitution requires us to follow the dictates of the law. Religious freedom does not allow you to violate the executive orders that have been issued during a crisis by one of the executive branches of government, whether it's the office of the President of the United States, the office of the governor of a particular state, the president of the county board, or the mayor of a city. And there have been some challenges, lawsuits filed by several religious leaders across the country who decided, in violation of all of the science, that they were just going to open up anyway. And as a result, deaths occurred, but the law did not look favorable on the church and did not give the church an exemption from any liability as a result of people within the congregations contracting the disease and possibly spreading it to others. So the First Amendment does not guarantee you that. And we can go to the next slide. And this just shows you there were cases around the country against the governors who issued these stay-at-home orders, closed the churches temporarily during the early stages of COVID. We had a particular lawsuit in Illinois, Elam Romanian Pentecostal Church versus Pritzker, and where the governor had issued a stay-at-home order for enclosed churches. So we're not going to get into the whole First Amendment. You don't have a First Amendment right to reopen in violation of orders from the government.
And public health and safety are involved.
Especially when the lives of people are at risk, and we know they're at risk. Next slide. And this is just a summary of the case, and this PowerPoint is available to you, so we're not going to get into the details of the case. Pastors, faith leaders, you don't have a right. Let's go next.
Next slide, please. Well, go ahead. The Supreme Court has already established that the public health and safety supersedes the constitutional right to religious freedom, to assemble and to worship. Limitations can be imposed on those freedoms, especially when it involves public health and safety. And that's basically what the Supreme Court of the United States ruled as long ago as 1990, but part of it is a common sense kind of understanding. If you exercise your right to worship and you kill all of your congregants as a result, what is the point? So quite naturally, the law was used to reinforce the concept that public health and safety is superior in certain circumstances, depending on what restrictions are being imposed to your right to worship.
Next slide. And so we're just highlighting the three things that you need to look at as the previous attorney suggested. There's some basic rules. If you don't know what they are, you go to the CDC website before members ask you, when we're going to reopen. Pastor, tell me when. We're going to look at the CDC website first. And then there's the OSHA Act and the American Disabilities Act. All of these particular laws have some impact even on churches, because now you're dealing with people who already have pre-existing conditions who will be coming to your worship center. And particularly those that are at risk to get COVID because they have pre-existing problems. Then they come to the facility, they may then, as was stated earlier, contaminate other people. Now you forced to do some other things that you haven't thought through because you just wanted to open up because you were getting pressure from your congregants. We need to fellowship. Next slide. And so the CDC continues to update its website with the particular rules and regulations. And one of the things that churches never think about is you have employees, whether it's one secretary and a janitor, those people have to be treated like any other employees in any other workplace. And oftentimes we don't see the church as a place of employment where we must protect our workers, as well as all of us know in our faith institutions, we have a lot of volunteers. Next. OSHA.
Well, the Occupational Safety and Health Act governs certain conditions that employers have to deal with for their employees, whether they're part-time employees or full-time employees. A lot of our churches, we have a lot of volunteers and only a few full-time or part-time employees. The real issue is really how are you prepared to treat not only your employees, but your guests and invitees when you have programs, worship activities, the entire gamut of worship activities that take place in your churches and temples and houses of worship. You have to be mindful. You have to have a team of people, especially to address the issues that you're going to face. Just bringing people into a worship facility. Who's going to be the people who are responsible, first of all, for screening people as they come in? Are you taking attendance? Everybody coming in order to do contact tracing, you have to really have people coming in, signing in, and giving you contact information so that if an incident arises, you can identify those people and then request that they supply you with all their contact data. So all of that has to be laid out in advance, planned in advance. You have to have people for that. And that's one of the issues that makes it very difficult for you to have worship services face-to-face. And that's why so many of our worship facilities remain closed, because we don't have the necessary personnel. We haven't trained the necessary personnel, and we don't have the insurance coverage for the liability that we will assume. There's all kinds of issues that arise when you're talking about exposing people to a potentially deadly virus.
So now we want to skip to the checklist because we want to allow more time for you to ask questions. So we can go all the way, the slides to the one that says checklist. First, you need to establish a reopening committee. Everybody keeps saying, when are we going to open? Well, that should be a reopening committee formed at your faith institution that includes your current janitor, your trustee, representatives from each of the ministries that operate within your church, someone from the choir, the music staff, because a lot of the challenges you face are people that are going to be using microphones. You need to make sure that your church employees are part of that reopening committee.
And certainly you need to have people who are charged with the responsibility. If you're going to have speakers and singers, someone has to be responsible to clean the microphones after each person utilizes them. And that entails quite a bit. In addition to the social distancing of the various participants within the worship service, you also might have to be concerned about the ventilation system within the church.
Yes.
There are just a whole host of other things that have to take place. Who's going to be responsible for maintaining the washrooms and overseeing the ingress and egress of people into the washroom facilities during the services?
And so we're going to go to the checklist. Next slide. You have to look at when we talked about, we got to have a reopening committee. The first group, you need to look at all of your insurance policies. What are you covered for? What kinds of, and you should do that annually anyway, but what kind of insurance coverage do you have? And most insurance policies do not cover you for COVID or any pandemic, but you need to check because you might need to get a rider to your policy if you are considering reopening. Do you have workers' compensation for your employees? What kind of property insurance do you have? And so you need to know this before you reopen. Don't wait till you reopen and have some issues, because not only do you already have the COVID, you have some other things that will impact your reopening, because you have people with disabilities. If you have a church like many of us, or faith institution, a lot of seniors, do they have the capacity to enter the limited number of doors that you're going to allow? You have to have people come in one door and go out another door. You have to deal with real ushers, not just sitting on the back row, but you have to have people meeting people at the door to take the temperatures, make sure that If they don't have a mask, can you provide them with masks prior to entry? And your signage, which is very key. You have to have signs on all of the entrances and exits, which let people know what the rules are. Those churches that are faith institutions that have electronic boards during service, you need to let people know what the rules are. When you open up, somewhere in the middle of the service, repeat the rules on the screens, because people act brand new, and then have a voiceover because some don't read. Be aware of these are the rules as you enter our church. We welcome you. Thank you for coming to our faith institution. We're glad to have you. However, everyone must wear a mask at all times while in this building. You must sit in the assigned designated seats, except families may sit together. All of those things you need ready and available. You no longer have bulletins that you hand people. You need, next slide, you need to look at all the surfaces and things that you touch. Communication team. You need a team that communicates regularly with members and visitors, social media, robocalls, or person-to-person calls from the members, making sure your auxiliaries communicate with their teams, your Bible study people. Everybody needs to be talking to people every week to let them know what the rules are and what is happening.
And you need rules enforcement. You have to have a team prepared to escort people out if they fail to abide by the rules or feel that they have some exemption to the rules. We have to have somebody who's responsible for making sure that there is no infringement of those rules. And that requires some very diplomatic persons, but also some very firm persons who will be willing to take the responsibility of making sure that the rules are not violated.
And then the whole issue of cleaning. This is not Brother Jones and Mary Jane doing their own little cleaning. You have to be able to, one, fully sanitize the building using different cleaning materials. The city gives you a list of appropriate COVID cleaning, and there are companies that do that. That's an expense. So you got to have a reopening budget. And you got to clean all places where people will be meeting. That's the sanctuary. If you have, and you have to follow the city or the state guidelines for how many people you're allowed to have based on your square footage. And then you got to mark off seats. Families can sit together, but they still have to sit according to the social distancing guidelines of this COVID. The pulpit, microphone, somebody's got to clean those mics in between every speaker. Same thing, if you're going to have singers, are you going to have the plastic shields? Because most of the spread is coming from the pulpit and the choir for the singers.
And then you might want to limit congregational singing. Absolutely. Because you don't want the congregation spreading through the atmosphere, the virus. There's so many different things. And especially if you have other meeting rooms, the finance room, or other places where small numbers of people gather. But again, even in small numbers, you have to make sure that everybody is identified as being who goes into those rooms, how long were they there, all those kinds of things. And then make sure that those rooms are, again, cleaned after every use. So that entails a great deal of resources to be able to meet those requirements.
And the thing is, everybody says wash your hands or use hand sanitizers. So the question is, do you have hand sanitizing stations throughout your sanctuary? Do you have the automatic water and soap dispensers in your bathrooms? Those are new expenses that the church is not prepared necessarily for. When you say, or the faith institution, I'm gonna reopen. Well, there's a price for that. If you're of a different faith tradition than using mats, how do you make sure that the mats, the people bring the mats and the floor, it's got to be recleaned. And how do you mark off 6 feet to 10 feet for the prayers and all? I mean, you have to think this through, and you need a risk management team at the church. That's be the next slide, I think. A risk management team. Somebody's got to monitor what happens in that building. You have to have some checklists of when did you clean it, who cleaned it, what cleaning protocol are they following? Somebody has to be the ushers or whoever you designate to monitor the social. They have to literally seat people. They have to open, who's gonna open the doors for worship and open the doors to the church? Are the ushers gonna do like they used to do, wear gloves, open up, do temperature checks at the door? Who's gonna do that? Who's gonna monitor the stations for soap and hand sanitation, making sure that they are full throughout the service, depending if you have one service or more than one? Who's gonna handle communications throughout the service, prior to the service? How are you gonna do offering? Because now you're touching more surfaces. You have to remove all of your hymnals from the sanctuary because we're not doing congregational singing. And what you used to do, certain kind of response, and you're not doing that because now creating more airborne possibilities, potential. So you got to reimagine what your in-person worship looks and feels like. Are you going to open up children's church? Or are you going to just open in one place where you have control? Are you going to have teen church? You have to think these things through.
And you can't have gatherings for food and fellowship as you might have had in the past. Those kinds of things are very potentially risky, and you are not in a position to monitor those things appropriately.
And so the signage, you want to make sure your signage complies with the city and the state guidelines and restrictions, and that they're visible. You post them on your website, your social media sites, wherever you are. And you need to also email and mail your members what the rules are, because they're going to bring people with them because they're coming back now to church. You can't sit with your friend. And you have to, indicate to people all of this in writing as a protection. Because remember this, the people that sue you are the people that are closest to you. And the first thing they do is they go for deep pockets. Deep pockets start with pastor, church, and board members. And the people closest to you know who the chairman or the deacon or the trustee board, they know your names, they know your addresses. The first people that will probably sue will be your employees. When all of the church cases we've had, it was deacon took the church to court over how to budget. And that's the other thing, you have to have a budget for all of this. What does it cost to sanitize your church regularly? What does it cost for the signage? What will it cost you for the new things that you have to put in? And before you reopen with the congregation, you might want to reopen with your leadership. See if they can follow the rules that you have put together. And creating this whole checklist of things for your church requires everybody to adopt them. It's like bylaws, so that people know what the rules are, they know why they are there, and that's going to take some time. The liability will be on the church because you will not be covered with insurance. And you have to have and people will say, well, if somebody gets sick, does the church have to say that they have COVID? You do have to notify people that were within that sphere of possibility that a person did test positive.
There was exposure.
Exposure, and therefore You've been referred to contact tracing. I mean, and these are things that, you know, make us uncomfortable, but I'd rather be uncomfortable than to be on a ventilator. And, you know, we have many instances where people have just violated all rules, and just groups of people contracted the disease and died. Several coaching bishops at a funeral. Even in Chicago, some people went to dinner together, and several of them became ill, and 7 died. I mean, so this is a serious disease. It doesn't care what your feelings are; it take you out. Next slide. This is it. All right. So we're open for questions, comments, concerns.
Thank you for that presentation. I want to give you guys a few ground rules. If you could, please put your comments or your questions in the chat room after we entertain the first sets of questions so that I can answer them in an orderly fashion. For those of you who want a copy of the presentation, please give us your contact information and put it in the chat box. Many of you, I do have your contact information. So everybody that's a part of our contact list and the Black Faith Collective or listening sessions, we will make sure that you get a copy of the slide presentation. So go ahead. Let me also let you know, in the bottom portion of your screen, if you look, you'll see 5 buttons. It says participants, chat, share screen, record, and reactions. We'll try to monitor the reactions button, and you can just click to raise your hand. And the combination of raising your hand and placing your questions in the chat box will help us to move this forward a lot more smoothly. So let's open up the floor for questions. Do we have any questions? Reverend Darrell Person is asking, our church is holding Sunday school when they open for worship. Reverend Person, is that for, do you want that for the entire group, or are you looking at the panel? Go ahead and talk.
I'm looking, anyone that can answer that.
Okay.
The panel preferably.
Okay.
But if someone else has some experience, absolutely, I'd like to hear. And also, have any churches thought about church meetings as well?
Okay.
I would recommend that you open one thing at a time and you do that gradually. I would not open all of my ministries to in-person gatherings. That's number one. And you might want to start opening with the smallest thing you have with the fewest number of people, and that might be Sunday school as opposed to worship. But before you open anything, you need to really go through this checklist with your leadership and survey your members so they understand the risk involved and the cost. You got to really come up with a budget. You can't just reopen this. It's not just turning the key and opening the door and y'all come on in now.
And Sunday school is a very difficult area because you're dealing with children who are not necessarily inclined to be disciplined themselves in terms of following directions. So you have to be able to have a good core of people who can make sure that the children not only know the rules before they are admitted in, but also are willing to follow the rules without and have the kind of discipline that they will be able to follow those rules.
No, but you're going to have an adult 1 to 10, one for every 5 children, because they got to be taken to the bathroom. And that's teenagers as well. And then you have to monitor the hand washing. I mean, it's a lot. We had an after school program. I did not allow them to have it at the church, no more. You got to do that on Zoom. And I mean, we want to embrace the young people, but you really have to have enough staff to deal with the disobedience. And little children, they just huggy, feely touch.
Yes.
So you gotta be prepared for that.
If I can just add to that, I think, and it kind of underscores something that Dr. Wilson mentioned during the presentation. What it is, I think it would be good to start a small group, but you have to practice.
Yes, sir.
You can't just have your rules and think everybody understands them and understands how to execute them. You need to kind of go through it several times so people become comfortable, because in essence, what you're really doing is you're creating new habits.
Right.
And it takes time to formulate new habits.
Thank you. We have a hand raised, Reverend Lynette Hill. Could you go?
Okay, let me unmute myself.
You're unmuted.
Okay, thank you so much for the information. It was definitely accurate. And while our church has not had in-house services, we have done funerals and have developed some protocols for that, which I still have concerns about. Some of the, if we have to do so much, then we need to really look at if we need to regather in the church in the first place. But one of the things, the information you gave us, doctors, were really good. But if you have, and each church should already have evacuation plans, we need to, in those group meetings with different people at the table, practice about how we would evacuate the church in case of emergencies. So we have COVID already, but if we have that fire or if we have another emergency, we need to be able to adapt those plans so we can get people out safely and in a timely fashion.
I think that's extremely important. The other thing we often talk about is, are you prepared for an emergency? So it's not only you evacuate, where do you go if it's a storm or an active shooter? Mm-hmm. What are the protocols for that? And we have to really begin to look at the church differently. And that's why I'm saying you have to sit down with your leadership and some professionals, security people, to tell you how do you prepare for the storms that do come, or fire. Sometimes churches are open and you have children who are coming to the church after school. Mm-hmm. Where are they supposed to go? Where do the church members go in a situation like what's happening in Texas or down in the Gulf when you have a storm that just uproots trees and disrupts? What do you do? And I think that's a very valid thing. And churches need to practice, as was said before. We have to really practice so that the stuff becomes routine for us. Because our routine now is just do whatever I feel like doing.
That's right. That's right. I'd like to thank you all for that commentary. I want to interject for just a moment. Brother Alan Conley just put a testimony saying that he's a COVID survivor. And everything that you said, Reverend Wilson, is indeed accurate. That is what he has said in our chat room. And I also want to give you an opportunity, for those who don't know, our esteemed president, Reverend Dr. Stephen Ray. I'm going to ask him to come and speak to us because he has to leave by 3 o'clock. So Dr. Ray, could you unmute yourself and speak to us at this moment? You're muted, Doc.
So first, let me thank each of you for being a part of this significant, important conversation. I want to thank our presenters who are really helping us to manage what is the ravage that is affecting our communities, right? Because I mean, one of the things that we are very clear about at CTS is that even with the efforts of Mayor Lightfoot, there are still such systemic disadvantages that direct resources, both monetary as well as organizational, away from our communities, that what could have been such a terrible outbreak has turned into a plague. So one of the things that we are committed to doing is, to the extent that we are able to bring the resources of our seminary by convening people who bring information and who bring guidance to help each and every one of you deal with this ravaged landscape. We are committed to bringing those resources. So I simply want to say that we are with you in this, because this is not going away anytime soon. We know the struggle is before us. Know that you have a friend at CTS, an organization that is committed to helping you thrive and deal with the strengthening and encouraging of your community. And once again, I would simply like to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this call, and for our presenters for bringing their wisdom and knowledge to the betterment and to dealing with these issues that are so critical to our community. So the last words I'd like to say is keep the faith, because at the end of the day, we're going to make it through this thing. But we can make it through either divided and separately, weak and worn, or we can join together strength and find encouragement in one another, so that as we go through these dark days, we do so knowing that the light that is ahead of us is also along with us, and is the gift of friendship and courage that we all have. So thank you so much, friends. And I offer my blessings to you all, and also to repeat, I offer the continuing friendship as well as support of Chicago Theological Seminary as you do the work that is so critical to the survival of our community. So blessings to each and every one of you.
Thank you, Doc. I think you muted the last portion of your comments.
Okay, well, I just have to dash, but thank you for being here, and know that we are here for you. Blessings to each and every one of you.
God bless you, Dr. Ray. We're gonna move now. My brother Nissan Shafkin has a question.
No question, sir. Just grateful. Thank you.
Oh, you just want to make a comment? Okay, got you.
Reverend Smith, can I make one quick comment?
Go ahead, Dr. Joe.
I know that one of the things that we've been hearing about is with the provision of people trying to go back and resume a potential in-service gathering. We know that the coronavirus, COVID-19, this travels, it's airborne. And one of the things that we have to be mindful of when we're all wearing our personal protective equipment, if one of us is up to speak at a microphone, even if the microphone is clean, don't forget those particulates can linger and be suspended in the air 30 minutes, some even longer, before they will dissipate and fall to a surface that needs to later be cleaned. And so I would propose that if we're going to be doing that, although it's not something that we're accustomed to seeing, you can still talk through a mask. And if someone is coming immediately behind me, I would recommend that that be done. So maybe the first person can take their mask off to talk, but if you're going to take true precautions and try and eliminate the spread, that would be a suggestion for how we would take that approach, in addition to washing off the microphone.
If it's possible, keep the mic on the stand without having to touch it.
Absolutely, yes, thank you, good point, yes.
Thank you. We have a question and a comment and question from Sister Adrienne Hutchison, a member of my congregation, amen. She says, I saw a news report about a Chicago church who was hoping to have pods for 100 students to participate during the school day while their family members were working. Volunteers were going to lead the pods. What should the concerns be for these types of programming at churches, for churches and participants? We want to be helpful, but we need to practice sense.
They should not do it. They're not going to be covered by insurance. People asked us to consider opening learning pods, and I feel for the parents, but unless the school is going to rent the facility and use the insurance that the schools have, we just can't do it because the liability is far too great. You cannot have children with just random volunteers. You really have to be careful because the liability goes to the institution where the child is. They're not going to sue some strange volunteer. They're going to sue the church, the pastor, and the boards. You got to make sure your board liability insurance is up to date. I would not do learning pods. And what you should do is you contract with the school. They bring the teachers, the team to your church. They pay you rent for your facility, but you do not open up at all for that. It's too dangerous, it's too risky, and we want to help families. It'd be better just to give them some money to pay someone to take care of their children at home. It's just, the liability is horrific.
And as part of the guideline for the religious services, there's a limit to the capacity of the building. So it should be 25% of the capacity, not to go over 50 people. So should think about that as well.
Other thing is that's not discretionary.
No, it's non-negotiable. So, and so then you end up in a triangulated kind of lawsuit because you violate the city's guidelines, you violate the state guidelines, and you have no coverage. It's not a good thing.
And I have two segue comments. Reverend Alan Connolly, who is with CPS, has put in the chat room guidelines that they're following for the CPS remote learning sites for students of essential workers. And I'm going to allow you, Dr. Crowder, to go ahead and state your question with respect to insurance. Go ahead.
Yes, the question I have, and of course, we don't have any plans in the immediate future to open our building, our after-school program, or any of that. We're going to remain virtual for the time being. But my question is, our insurance company sent us, maybe about a month ago, a suggestive waiver. And the waiver had, just some jargon related to members signing the waiver. And so I guess my question is, and I felt some kind of way about the waiver, and I told our church leadership that, I didn't like it, didn't agree with it, and we weren't opening anyway, but I just wanted to be on record as saying that I felt some kind of way about it. Could you talk about these waivers and their legality? Are they, when the insurance company sends those, what are they really saying to us? I guess is the question that I have.
Well, you can't waive the liability if someone, people, I don't see how they're going to be able to sign as a parent or parishioner a waiver saying, I will hold the church harmless from any liability. I would think if the insurance company is sending it to you, they're sending it to waive liability for the insurance company, and you end up with no protection. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. What do you think, Doc?
Let me throw 2 cents in. First is, why did the insurance company send it to you?
I knew you were going to go there.
Why did they send it? Because what they're going to say is, what should have been a good practice is you should have got a waiver. Mm-hmm. So you have violated some term of a standard of conduct that they expect of you. So they're going to use that as a potential avenue to escape liability or vitiate liability. That's part one I see of your question. The second part goes to the point that Dr. Wilson addressed is, waivers they do have validity. It's not as if they're just unvalid. But the problem is this situation is with the COVID, the pandemic, is so fluid in the sense that you can't it's one thing for people to assume or waive liability when they know the risk. But when they don't know the risk, then they can't waive it. And part of that saying of being a knowing waiver, and then you're creating a mixed signal when you're saying we're doing all these things to prevent. If you haven't done all the things you're supposed to do, then that waiver is not going to stand, because I made the decision to exercise a waiver based on all these things. And the third point, Reverend Crowder, goes more to the point you mentioned last. How many of you really going to want to have people sign a waiver? They're going to say, this is church. I feel at home. You're going to tell me I got to sign a waiver? And then even those people delegated with the responsibility of doing the waiver, they're going to say, oh, John, I ain't going to sign that thing. Don't worry about it. I ain't going to tell Pastor. Just go on in there. We know you're good. It's a nightmare that should be avoided, because if you're not going to be very strict in the implementation, then it's going to fail you.
Thank you. Here, what does Marie say? So true, Attorney Mitchell. Even the CDC is changing their guidelines and then saying that they posted things accidentally. That was actually something that I thought about coming into this gathering today, because I was monitoring some of the posts. I got the initial posts, and like many of you, I was excited. I was saying, okay, maybe we're going in the right direction. People are acknowledging what we know. I don't think, and I was sharing this with Dr. Jasmine, you don't have to be an MD, you don't have to be a PhD to know that when people open their mouths, something is coming out. We know something is coming out. And so to suggest that people would breathe and that there's nothing happening is ludicrous. And we've been practicing social distancing, and we know that the masks can impact what's taking place. I don't want to put you on the spot, Doc. Well, no, I'll ask Dr. Jervis. As far as the aerosols, as we're receiving conflicting information, what information have you received, and what is your opinion of what is true?
And you're ever so right, Reverend Smith. The information is variable, and I'm sure Dr. Jasmine can attest to that. We've heard everything from, just again, clean the surfaces as long as you've got a face covering. Well, there's different types of face coverings, and now people are trying to get it as a fashion situation where I'm going to match my garment and it's just one layer. We know multiple layers is what's protective, and you're supposed to be wearing, the personal protective equipment device would be the mask that you would see that have multiple layers or filter. The N95s are obviously more preferable, but not everyone can get their hands on it. So a bandana is not a protective measure, but we know that the particulates can linger, and they have been tested, and that is a form of transmission, which we talked about. So having people to think that that's not going to be effective, it does. It helps to prevent, but we have to do so much more than just wearing our face mask. And as Dr. Jasmine indicated earlier, washing our hands and maintaining that distance. They've done a few studies. I work with some of the scientists who are studying this disease, and those that are infectious disease control too, that are doing some studies. And some of these might be extreme. So I don't know how much pressure was utilized, but they're showing evidence that some of the particulates can travel further than 6 feet. So obviously, if you're in the presence of someone who has coughed, make sure that you're not walking back into that path, even if you've got a mask on. So don't be fooled by that. And again, this is why we're talking about make sure we get the right facts. Look at where you're getting your information from, not to look at sources that are the fake news, so to speak. The Center for Disease Control has been under a lot of pressure, and they've done it about face because at one point they were putting out positive information. They're reporting that to the World Health Organization, and then they were getting pressure to not disclose what was happening here in the US so that we would look more favorable from the world's perspective. So we have to be cognizant of what we are talking about and making sure that we take those precautions. Compound that with what's normally going to happen with the regular flu season. So we're going to be even more on edge. Now, if someone sneezes, we all panic. If someone coughs, God forbid. So we're just going to have to, again, take the necessary precautions to try and stay healthy.
And I just want to add to what Dr. Jervis was saying about the social distancing being 6 feet. The CDC also recommends for those who are singing that distance be 10 feet. So not everyone's always aware of that. And then when it comes to N95 masks, we ask that is usually, because there's such a low supply, to reserve it for those treating those who we know are COVID positive. But wearing facial coverings, being consistent with it, not touching your face, those are the important measures, including washing your hands.
Okay, we are nearing the end of our session, but I have 2 questions that I want to field. Reverend Daryl Person asked, I want to be clear what is allowed. Is it a max of 50 people or 25% of capacity? Our sanctuary has 1,100 seats.
Once again, this is why it's so important that you become familiar with the public health directives of the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. All right, right now, what Dr. Jasmine referred to are the city of Chicago's public health directives, which you are obligated to follow. even more so than the state. All right. So when it says 25 people, it's the lesser of 25 people or 25% of your capacity. Your capacity is not measured on the number of seats that you have in your place. Your capacity is measured about how many people that can be socially distanced within your place. So like within, let's say some of the mosques where they can accommodate in my community can accommodate maybe 400, 500 people. But when you try to have 6 feet, people to be positioned 6 feet from each other, both left, right, front, and back, that gets cut down to about 50 or less. So those are the guidelines in terms of it. It's not like take 1,100 divided by 4 and come up with 550 and say, I can handle 550. No, because you're then violating both the state of city of Chicago, which says no more than the 50/25%. And then the Illinois says is the most that you can have is 100. What it is Chicago is more restrictive, but the other thing is Chicago does make allowance that you can have separate places of worship and then still come in accordance with that number. But then it gets to be a legal question. Does that mean because I got 3 different separate spaces with separate ingress, egress, that I can have 150 and Illinois says 100? I would use 100 as your maximum because that's the limit that the state of Illinois sets. But I mean, it's unclear, and the best thing for you to do is stay away from the gray area and stay in what was black and white.
Thank you, Brother Mitchell. Here's another question from Dr. Crowder. And please feel free to respond, both panelists and people that are present here participating. Is anyone hosting drive-in worship service? Are there liabilities with those services? And let me add on to his question, how about outdoor services? So let's talk about people that are hosting outdoor or drive-in worship services. And are there liabilities with either of those services?
Yes, there are liabilities because I may drive up to hear the service and park on the parking lot or sit outside, but what if I have to go to the bathroom?
Okay.
Is the church completely closed?
Okay.
And how are you handling the participants in the service? Is it pre-taped or is that live? And are you providing all of the social distancing? How are you doing that service?
Okay.
Because I've seen some drive-by birthday things and they have one mic, they're not cleaning the mic, they have a person sitting and people are talking. So, I mean, you got to really think through how you do it. The drive-in is much safer if they remain in the cars, but the question is, are you letting them get out to go in the bathroom? I just want to see the sanctuary one more time. What you come to?
You know, in a number of the mosques in Chicago, well, we have closed all restroom facilities.
Wow.
You have to go before you come.
And after you leave.
And if you gotta go, you gotta leave. But more importantly, I think, once again, we cannot ignore the social nature for us in worship, all right? Even when you start talking about, I know someone had mentioned earlier about funerals and needing to re-question that. Because even though it's a funeral, then there's gonna be a repast.
That's right.
People are gonna hug each other and say, "Oh, I miss Sister Lulu," and blah 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 blah. And who's gonna stop them from doing all of that? You know, I mean, I think really when you're making these decisions to reopen, you've got to really assess how well you are positioned to firmly enforce these rules. If you fail to do that, then you're just opening up the situation, and then you're going to be regretted. If nothing more than you said, maybe if we had done that, that person wouldn't have got infected and that person wouldn't be in the hospital right now. So, I mean, it is challenging. I think what we recommend, continue to recommend, is virtual services. And I think you should take away the insight and counsel of Dr. Jervis that ain't no vaccine coming this year. It ain't gonna be to sometime next year, and who knows when next year it's gonna be. And then half of us, I'm gonna put myself in that line, I'm afraid to be the first one to take the virus. I want to see if this actually works. So it's gonna be a time period before all this comes to light. And I think it is about encouraging virtual services is the safest course of action at this point in time.
And that means virtual weddings, virtual funerals, virtual baby blessings, virtual communion if you're in the Christian tradition. We can do all of these things virtually, and it may not be comfortable, but I'm much more comfortable on this side of a hospital and a respirator than on the other side. And we just have to really understand this is a different space. We have to reimagine worship.
Absolutely. And I think that reimagine worship, this is an exciting time, even though it's a scary time. But God has given us the tools that we need to reimagine how worship can be, how Christian education can be reconfigured, but how we can continue to do intergenerational ministry. So it's an exciting time too. So I'm sad on one end, but I'm excited that God has given us the resources that we need on the other hand.
Thank you. Reverend Miles, you asked the question about funerals. Have we satisfied your question? You specifically said, should we be doing funerals in the church or at the funeral home?
Yes, I got my answer from Dr. Wilson just a moment ago. Thank you.
Outstanding. Well, we're going to conclude our presentation. I want you all to come back when we have additional speakers and opportunities. But this is going to be ongoing. This is a wish of Dr. Ray for us to come together to discuss issues before there's a crisis. And that's the one thing that he preaches to me. Brian, we do so much running around putting out fires, and we never stop to think. So I welcome your comments, your suggestions. We're going to try to have a different topic at least once every 2 months, if not every month. And we're excited about this opportunity, and we hope that you'll continue to join with us. Is Reverend Ozzie Smith still on the line? Reverend, could you give us a closing blessing and prayer?
Yes,
and let me lift him up. Let's give him a congratulations. He has been crying for minutes. Reverend, we love you. We appreciate you. You still inspiring me, and I love you. So I just want to lift you up in front of everybody and tell you how much you mean to us.
Well, I want to thank y'all for all of this information. We have been virtual. We're going to be virtual, and virtual is a blessing.
Yes.
And insulates us from a lawsuit. So let us pray. God of grace, God of glory, God of our ancestors on whose shoulders we stand today, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for the information that was flowing from those who have been here to help us. Just like Israel was in the wilderness, every time you called for the building of something, they already had what they needed among them. And so, God, we thank you for these professionals and these who are trained to help us not make assumptions and to also know that the Israelites still want to do what they want to do. So, God, we thank you for virtual and ask now that we would leave this gathering with this information and use it to honor you and to honor the people that we serve and to maintain a healthy atmosphere among us. And we pray this prayer, thanking you for all that we have consumed today. In Jesus' name, we pray with thanksgiving. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. You all make sure you put your email addresses in our chat box so we can stay in contact with you. And we'll get the presentation out to you. This entire presentation will be placed on the CTS webpage by our media team soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Reverend Ozzie, I'll tell Pat I listened to you today, so she'll get a kick out of
What the,
that.
tell it.
I'll tell Pat Hill, yeah, that I saw her.
All right. Yeah, I
Thank
saw
you,
her.
Reverend Smith. God bless you.
God bless you as well. All right, take care.
You too.
Bless y'all.
Thanks, Brian.
Bless you, Reverend. How you doing?
I got a little back issue right now, but I'm on the mend, so
Okay.
that's good news, yeah.
Take it
But
easy.
this was wonderful, so thanks again.
Thank you. Dr. Ring is going to be coming to us talking about the whole issue with law enforcement and police. He's got a group that's doing some very interesting work in terms of suggesting how I told him I don't like the fund. I don't like the term defund. I would like to say refund or change the funding. But he's going to talk to us about that soon.
Ooh.
Bless y'all. Thank you, panelists. I'll be in touch with you. I really appreciate all of your insights. You all did an amazing job. Thank you, Roxy. Thank you, Marie. Okay. Bless y'all.